Welcome to Metapod, the podcast where we discuss operational execs and organizations that make and move stuff, and our common headaches, digital transformation, the forever labor shortage, and doing more with less. And now, the host of Metapod, Ron Crabtree.
Okay, so here we're going to be getting into a discussion around supply chain and the potential impacts we might tap into talent. We've got our guest speaker here, Bryan Seidensticker, who's going to be speaking up here in a couple of minutes. And really, we're going to get into a diagnostic first. Bryan's going to share with us, what are some things that, like the 3 key things you should probably be thinking about, right? Do we have opportunities and challenges there, and can elaborate on that a bit? And then from there, the most important part of this is, what do you do? What are the actions you might take if you determine that that's a challenge for your organization? Some of Bryan's practical suggestions and recommendations about how we might do that. So with that, Bryan, why don't you take a moment here and introduce yourself to our audience?
Thanks, Ron. So I've had a pretty long career now, both supply chain operations, manufacturing operations, with multi-industry experience, both global, regional, and local application around anywhere from telecom, automotive, software. So I've really been blessed to have this very diverse background and experience, both geographically and then across different verticals. And as a result of that, I've really adopted a more change agent kind of approach to my participation in career. So a lot of transformation or leadership, thought leadership, or developing folks within the supply chain and operations functions. I went to Kelley School of Business in Bloomington, Indiana, and still love to return there to watch our Fighting Hoosiers not do so well these recent years, but appreciate the opportunity to spend some time with you this morning and looking forward to the discussion.
Awesome. Bryan, I'm really pleased that you were able to make yourself available to support us for this. And one of the things about Bryan that I think is particularly interesting is he's had a lot of experience and relatively recent history around, I'll call it digital transformation and the execution of supply chain, which is clearly among those top 3 things that organizations got to deal with, right? It's forever labor shortage, right? Doing more with less, and you got to be on that wagon, right? You can't be a trailer because you will get left behind. So with that, now let's pivot and just, Bryan, share with us what you would consider to be like the top 3 diagnostics, things organizations should be thinking about and determining whether or not this is an opportunity or a challenge for them. Or if you could tackle that for us next.
Yeah. So, I think the common thread really in every organization is strategic framework, right? And there's usually a budget and a plan and, kind of a tapestry that weaves all the functional part of the organization through those kind of typical foundations, right? So we're all used to going through that process annually or every 5 years, 3 years, whatever the case may be. What often happens is the validation of alignment is a challenge, right? There's a lot of fear in, being the outlier potentially to what might be a strong personality or some paradigms that are just present within the organization. So I think one of the first keys is really being able to honestly determine how aligned your team really is to those objectives. And what are those objectives and strategies as they relate to your supply chain and operations? Something like warehouse automation can be a very overwhelming initiative that can develop, right? And the adoption of that is both a risk and an opportunity to take a step back and really look at, should we be buying solutions? Should we be making our own solution, right? Or do we have the master data backbone to actually, support the direction we want to go to? Those are key insights that you have to have a lot of maturity level within the team. And if you don't necessarily have the skill or the folks present with that experience, that's an opportunity to really look outside the organization, whether it be through your vendor network, third parties, colleagues, any of the, other alternatives. But you really need to have a very sober view of where is that alignment, and then ultimately figure out, can your team articulate, why are we doing this strategy, right? Not just the fact that we've agreed to it, it's, do they understand the strategic nature of these decisions? And have they really demonstrated They know how to implement, define, deploy these kind of strategies. And do they really have the capacity to take this on? And again, those are difficult assessments to make because they're always cloaked potentially in an array of issues within any organization. So as an executive, you have the opportunity to really step back and do a clean assessment of this, because it's very important, right, when you're making those kinds of investments and transformations, that you have a good, honest assessment and then really consider, what does the team need in terms of support and help. So the second piece would be experience, right? What about these decisions become clear delineations for what the organization is taking on something completely new? Automation can be incremental. So that's a learning as you go process. Digital transformation can be an all at once endeavor, right? You could find yourself having stayed on a platform or a set of processes that have really become a disadvantage, and you decide, we're going to make a transformation to, cloud-based ERPs, or we're going to really invest, go off the ERP platform and get into more distinct WMS, TMS, advanced planning systems, or, what's all this about RPA and AI? How do we use that to leverage? And again, you can kind of chase the curve of innovation into a very dark alley, right? So when you realize, hey, these are really new things to us, it's not a natural act for people to kind of say, well, look, that's beyond my capability, right? Everybody has kind of the desire to be part of that accomplishment and that transition. So
yeah, so let me interrupt you for just a second here, because you're saying something really important here, and I know you'll get into it in this next part of the podcast around what do you do, right? You have to determine, this is a challenge for an organization. And one of my observations, having keenly paid attention to digital transformation, is there is a basket load, 25 plus different chunks, right, that come into play. My personal opinion, a bit of this is kind of like, you can't do it all, right? You got to pick your spots. And there's no big bang, right? There's no like silver bullet cure. Back in the day, the ERP system will solve all our problems forever. And if we just do that, the life is good. Well, that's not how it goes. I see it as more as death by 1,000 cuts. Is, you got to pick your spot. So when you get into diagnostic, I'm sure you'll talk about that. But I wanted the audience to recognize that digital transformation is easy to talk about, but it's a real bear. And if they're not paying close attention to that, we'll probably be sorry later. So I'll let you continue on to your third.
Yeah, no, those are very very valid insights. It kind of leads into the notion of I won't say making a strategy is easy by any stretch, right? And there's a lot of fear that can come along with that. But the unknown is really a common denominator, right? As you decide to reach into those, kind of 25 elements, as you've noted, what are the risks that come along with that? And typically, in my experience, they're exposed in the area of master data management, right? As an organization, are you ready from a core data perspective to actually make that transformation into an environment that requires perhaps a level of structure that you're not, either accustomed to or don't understand. So then it's about a capacity, right? The third kind of big thing is, the team is going to take on this endeavor. Do they have the real capacity? Because you got to kind of keep the ship on the current course while you chart the new course, right? And that's another one where, again, it can become hard to assess that. So you've really got to put some thought into how do you, really set that team up for success. And that's where, again, using, a variety of flexible resource, flexible capacity we're all used to in more operations, but in strategy and in kind of building out a new frontier, there's other ways, right, to acquire kind of that flex capacity to build out your team. So you have the opportunity to de-risk what might become the evolutionary process and the discovery where it's not the right time to realize you're not really in the right position to pull off the transformation.
Yeah, you brought up a really good point there about master data. And one of the terms I've heard, and it's very related to what you said, it's called enterprise information management. And, that's something that that we have to stop and think about, particularly in supply chain, because it's not an island, it's not like the functional island just doing, manufacturing, and all we got to worry about is the data on the shop floor and manufacturing execution systems, interfaces, quality management, blah, blah, blah. And if you start talking about supply chain, you're really kind of going out to EIM. Like, this is end-to-end enterprise that has to be in the radar all the way from, edge sensors out in the field, what's going on out there that's going to impact us, all the way upstream to what's going on, the source of the supply chain could be in play for a given organization. So that was really good stuff. Let's get into the fun and the best part of these Metapod episodes is the practical advice, right? So let's just say that, yep, they've thought about those things, some of these things. Yes, in fact, we need to dig into that. Could you give us some advice on, okay, now we recognize it's a threat or an opportunity. What do we do? I'm interested in that part.
Yeah, and as I thought about this segment a little bit, I'm a do-it-yourselfer, Ron. I like it in my home. It's almost an insult if I hire a plumber, an electric. I pride myself on somehow solving every single problem around the house. Or this winter, my wife wanted to paint the cabinets in the kitchen. And I thought, well, if you're going to talk about a simple task, right, painting, right, easy. And to kind of relate it to our discussion, right, she engaged, we as a functional leadership team of the household, got together and really laid out what the key objectives were. What was the end result with that in mind, right? Really helped me understand the nuance and intricacy of that outcome that was expected. And it really helped me to identify the gaps in my true capability versus me just slapping paint on something, right? And as I accepted that alignment allowed us then to reconcile, where we needed help, where was the opportunity for me to divert my attention in a direction that is useful for the bigger goal of what we're doing around our entire household versus getting really involved in something that I would have probably the least likely capability to have the outcome she was expecting and ultimately I was expecting. So that alignment is super, key with your team is you really have to expose those expectations in a practical way that they are comfortable realizing that, maybe I think I can do it, but actually what's better is an alternate path.
Yeah, if I can interrupt for just a second, you said something that are very important that we kind of get caught up in. And one of the things I like to share with organizations when we talk about tapping into interim talent, right? People like Bryan that can just pop in and help with very tactical, very specific problems to be solved, is people and organizations get to do everything the first time as an amateur. And I really resonated with that example of, and we have a painting project. Wow, my wife, Kim, she's off to the paint store and we talk to paint experts to really understand that application, what should be the prep, what would be the underlying, what's the right application methods, et cetera, et cetera. And that was a great analogy that you shared there. So thank you for that.
Yeah. So, and again, there's complexity and technical requirements in just about anything we do. And so, when you sometimes overlook those, then you increase the size of the task in the long term. So that alignment and that reconciliation with your team, right? That's the opportunity to really then lower the perception of threats or risk to their individual perspectives or their individual goals, right? Because it's really important that you have a team that is in the mindset to tackle something like digital transformation or adoption of technologies or processes at the level that typically challenge an organization. You need them to really feel comfortable in how they're going to leverage what they bring to the table, and they're not threatened by alternatives to use the synergy of the team as opposed to the individual taskmasters. And then spend the time as an executive to really have them articulate, it's don't get the bovine acceptance where everybody's like, oh yeah, we're going to do this and we understand why. Well, I want you feed it back to me. Like, show me within your functional framework that how this transformation is really going to be monetized or be able to drive the cost to the place that we're trying to take it. So there's a kind of a task of demonstration of how you can do this, why we should do this, and then do you really have the capacity for delivering in the time frame we need to meet our strategic objectives.
Yeah, if I could tag on to that, one of the things I urge companies to think about, if they haven't done it yet, you should have a really detailed process map end to end of these supply chain processes. But inside of that, you actually have to have data, right? The time, the money we're spending, be it human effort or whatever, the first time quality capability of having actual data. And then I'd like to challenge the team of, okay, we want to digitize. So show me in the process exactly which of these steps are going to be better and how much. What steps can we eliminate? Which ones would have better first-time quality? Which one would go faster and easier? I'd like to put, and to your point, people got to articulate back to us clearly, where does this come home and actually pay for itself in a meaningful way? So that was great advice. Thank you.
I'll move on to the second element, which is around experience, right? And what's new to us, what would be different for the organization. And this is where I believe really deep diving your sales operations planning process as an adjunct to the strategic framework is super important. And again, there's a budgeting process that can really emulate what people are used to and calling it S&OP, right? But there's a more detailed framework, right, that takes you into each of those functional areas of responsibility. And how are you going to deliver the top line? How is that segmentation of my operating costs or my SG&A relating back to the influence of these strategic initiatives, right? And tying very tightly the assumption set and the, what are the tasks versus what are the absolutes in terms of our cost structure, and really getting people comfortable in having, a mathematic model underneath all this assumption set, so that as you go along the journey, you have a point of reconciliation, right? Accountability is only as good as the framework in which you are managing that accountability through. And financially, those endpoints are generally well understood. So as you can pull them together into that assumption set of your framework and strategy, people feel, again, more relieved and comfortable that there's at least a place to go reconcile when new challenges or new opportunities emerge along the way. And that allows us to articulate that in the end point, as opposed to kind of having a surprise, right? 6 months later or 12 months later, good or bad, right? So I think it's the dashboard of the car we're going to drive. Let's keep the lights on it and all those meters nicely tuned, and let sales operations planning really be the front edge of how we run the metrics around our performance assumptions, so that we don't, end up with people kind of on an island without the understanding of how they relate back to those accountabilities that are always going to be there, right, on the finance side.
Exactly. And I'd like to offer, Bryan, I'm probably just overrunning here some of your suggestions, but this ties back to your digital transformation strategy, right? So if SIOP, sales inventory and operations planning, really being good at that as a competitive advantage differentiator in your organization, that has to inform what we want to do on the digital transformation side, right? So do we need to pull in some data cleansing, EIM type practices? Do we need to figure out how we're going to have edge sensor data feeding us downstream in terms of consumption, pointing upstream? So, these things all relate to one another. You can't do any of this in a vacuum, right? So I would suggest you probably would quickly agree that a good SIOP strategy, really thinking about what we need to do and how to do it, actually informs what we should be doing in digital transformation.
Yeah, no, totally agree. Being able then to, like I said, kind of associate those back and forth and really know that, hey, if we're going to make an investment, for instance, go from a captive or a localized solution to a cloud solution, and the money looks like it's working against me, well, I need to reconcile that to, well, no, how does that ultimately translate into the benefits and how we're going to leverage those and pay for that? Not only whatever the different retail costs, let's call it, would be, but also where the synergies are to drive more through the organization. But specifically how, get it into that level so people are committed on the front end as to what the results they need to deliver and what are the metrics they're going to be held accountable to.
Awesome.
So the the last piece of that then is commitment, right? Again, a lot of the transformation challenges come with a top-down kind of edict, right? We've made a choice as an organization to go in direction A, B, or C. and strategically, in the town hall, it all makes sense. But it's almost an out-of-body experience as the rank and file are being engaged. You need that commitment at functional leadership and really down, to the every level of the organization. But get at least your functional leadership team to be participating in that gap analysis, that association of how these relate to the financials, and make the plan or how we've identified the capabilities of delivering that their own, right? You really got to get them to buy in and make that commitment, right? And a lot of that is a lack of knowledge and understanding that keeps them away from that commitment, right? And they're looking for how it's somebody else's idea, or I never agreed to that, right? So again, what other resources do you need to close those gaps? How do you get people to accelerate their understanding of a future state they don't understand, relate it to their present state, and buy into, okay, now that I have all the information, I can absolutely dive in with, all 10 fingers and toes here and really get to work on this and not be worried about the politics of the failure I think is out there in front of me, because I just don't understand what I don't understand.
Awesome. So I like something here in the notes about, the RACI. You might expand on that just a little bit for those who may not be familiar with the term RACI.
Yeah. So in the, general term, it's, responsible, accountable, consulted, and informed, right? And it's an exercise that I've seen done super formally or less, and generally speaking, it exists, whether you identify it or not, right? You as a individual contributor or a leader, we all are have a responsibility part of our function. We're accountable, certainly, for certain things. We are consulting with those, maybe formally, informally, and we definitely are informing people. So when you go through the more formal approach and mirror that, right, with kind of whether it's the transformation strategy itself, or it could become part of the transformation in terms of how will we look at the end of this, right? How will that change? Sometimes what a RACI really exposes is the complexity of how hard it is for us to do business, right? With our clients or even internally with our stakeholders. So the RACI exercise, like S&OP, I think is another pillar, which again, it's not the sexy stuff that, you might see in the presentation of, hey, look at all the new things that this new network or this new tool or shiny object's going to bring. But this is where the work gets done. And again, that's what makes people either fear-based or conviction-based, is having very clear understanding of what's my responsibility going to be on the other side. What is my accountability? Who do I consult? Who do I inform, or how do I get informed? These are where the elements of success are more present when you've actually done this homework and put it around the strategy with your functional leadership team in a way that they are now again engaged and buying in and part of what that RACI looks like, as opposed to being kind of a victim, let's say, of an outcome.
Yeah, and I don't suppose the RACI exercise could be useful to create a breadcrumb trail for, wait a minute, where do we have some gaps that we might tap into people like Bryan, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So, again, I think those, as I call them, I guess the pillars, right, of, getting commitment, and commitment is kind of related to, going through a couple key exercises. Finance and responsibility matrixing, are really those two foundations, both exposing and reconciling the how, the why, and the when. And then you've got a pretty good map at that point where your team has gone through these exercises and starts to realize, hey, where are my insurance policies? How do I, if I'm going to do something brand new for the first time, what can I use to accelerate my knowledge? What kind of resource can help me, move this so far ahead of what the learning curve otherwise would be, that it gives me time to react to new knowledge, right? You may not want what you're asking for when you kind of get closer to the end. And to be able to pivot before you're there is really a super key. So from an executive perspective, you've got to be able to see far enough out that your team doesn't walk into these kind of quicksand moments or distractions that really then blow up your budget, get distracted of delivering the current state and really create the turmoil we're all trying to avoid whenever we take on the risk of a transformation like we're talking about.
Well, that's awesome stuff. That is awesome stuff, which kind of brings stuff into wrap up, just for a lack of time to keep going. Obviously we could talk for hours and tell lots of stories about all this really goes together at a granular level. But we're going to go ahead and move into wrap up here. Bryan, would you share with us, how people get in touch with you if they want to ask you questions?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I'd be happy to answer any questions. And from a LinkedIn perspective, Bryan Seidensticker, B Seidensticker in the LinkedIn world. My direct email, brians4144@gmail.com. And I'd say those are two great ways to reach out and contact me. Happy to share any of additional experience or insights or become a network node as that would be useful to anybody.
All right, Bryan, awesome job. I really appreciate you could join us. Keep the faith.
Great. Thanks, Ron.
Thank you for joining Metapod. For requests on topics or to ask questions, you can connect with Ron Crabtree 3 ways: via email at metapod@metaexperts.com, via LinkedIn, or by calling him directly at 734-425-1455, extension 103. Lastly, if you love the show, please consider leaving a 5-star review on your favorite podcast app. We truly appreciate all your support.